On this episode of The Cold Front, we span the globe to talk about the historic drought in California and the weather in Sochi for the Olympic Games.
Plus, we'll dive into the recent warm-up here in the Midwest and tell you why you shouldn't put away those heavy coats just yet. We're changing the way you see weather. This is The Cold Front on VUTV. Welcome to the program, everybody. I'm Matthew Schaefer.
And I'm Rachel Dunzing. So often we get caught up in the plethora of weather that the United States has to offer, but actually our friends across the pond in England are having a real tough go of it weather-wise as well. Much of the United Kingdom is suffering through heavy rain, damaging winds, and catastrophic flooding. Some areas in Great Britain experienced the wettest January in 250 years, causing the River Thames to reach its highest levels in 60 years. The other problem for residents is that the ground is extremely saturated from weeks of heavy rain, so there is nowhere for the water to go. Nearly 6,000 properties have been flooded since the beginning of December, more than 1,000 of them in more affluent areas in the Thames Valley. February has not been any better as 86 flood warnings, 2 of them severe, remain across southern and central England as the extreme weather begins to settle. And, we think about flooding here, on campus. We've started to see a little bit of flooding on the sidewalks. I can only imagine, if you look at some of the pictures that are coming out of this event, there are houses that are halfway up with water.
Yeah, and this hasn't just been isolated events like we saw over here in Valpo. This has been going on for months now, and it's all due to this pattern that's been persistent. It's the same pattern that kept us cold, kept Alaska warm, and it's just bringing a lot of rain over there to England, and that's just drowning them in water, 7 feet in some spots.
Yeah.
That's insane.
It really is, and it's not just the weather. Obviously the rain has been a big part of it, and the river's swelling and the river's flooding, but there's also actually been a little bit of a lack of funding for some of the programs over there that actually help clear out flooding and a little bit of emergency management. The government over there has just been overlooking it for the past few years, and so that's definitely been a problem there as well.
Yeah, and then when it goes to so much on the extreme, when you're not ready for the normal levels, you really have to struggle here to make it really work.
And we've been talking about 7 feet of water in some places, and look at these pictures coming out of England. You can see that there are a lot of houses that are underwater. You have cars that are having severe damage because of flooding, all this, and it's just definitely been a pretty severe event over there in England.
Yeah, and the time scale too just does not help things at all. Last week was Valentine's Day, or Single Awareness Day, depending on who you ask. But February 14th meant very different things this year for people in Indonesia. An explosive volcanic eruption on Indonesia's most populated island blasted ash and debris 12 miles into the air and forced authorities to evacuate more than 100,000 people and close 6 airports. Unfortunately, the blast killed 3 people. The overnight eruption of Mount Caulfield on Java Island reportedly could be heard up to 125 miles away. The 5,680-foot high Mount Caulfield, about 375 miles east of the capital of Jakarta, have been rumbling for several weeks and was under close observation. Caulfield's last major eruption was in 1990, when the explosion killed more than 30 people and injured hundreds.
Well, the Winter Olympics are coming to a close, and weather has had a measurable impact on the Games in Sochi, Russia. Primarily from a climatological perspective, Sochi is actually the warmest host city for any Winter Olympic Games. Unlike much of Russia's vast subarctic climate, Sochi sits in a humid subtropical region. The Games were held during a stretch of the city's coldest winter stretch, with a daily average high temperature of 49 degrees and an average low of 36. And especially early on in the Olympics, the weather was a huge hindrance for many athletes because of unusually mild temperatures over snowpack. Soupy fog settled over the outdoor venues last Monday. The fog was so thick that both the biathlon and snowboard cross events were postponed. Last week was the first time since 1998 and only the third time ever that the men's biathlon was pushed back because of weather. In other events, mild temperatures softened alpine courses and made it very difficult to land at the bottom of the half pipe. And, when we think about the Winter Olympics, we think of all of these events that deal with snow, and you think of 49 degrees, that's not that's not favorable for snow.
No, it's not. And actually, what surprised me more about this was not the high temp, but the low temperature doesn't even drop below freezing on average here during the Olympics. So all the snow you see is obviously trucked in or fake, and it just doesn't support snow. And that's what you mainly think of all the events, snow and ice for Winter Olympics.
Yeah.
All the sliding and different things that all the events are. I mean,
for sure.
I mean, it's just 100 different ways of sliding around, really. I mean.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like you said, with the low temperature not even dropping below freezing, it doesn't even have a chance for it to get a little bit more compact overnight. So that can be a real problem. And I know looking at some of the events and watching the Olympics, they've definitely had a pretty hard time of it. Obviously they're, like hockey and figure skating and all that, they're inside in a more controlled climate, so that's not as bad. But it's definitely a lot of those outdoor events that they're really having a problem with. And you hear athletes complain about it all the time. Just not always the best conditions, but they're making it work. So it's fun.
Yeah, exactly. They're making it work. Well, we're going to step aside for a bit, but after the break, we'll discuss the dire situation in California with the drought, as well as the crazy weather in the Midwest when we come back. Stay tuned.
Hi everybody, I'm Dick Vitale of ESPN, and I'm on VUTV. It's awesome, baby, with a capital A.
Interested in the television industry? Stop by our office in Schnabel Hall and join VUTV today.
Welcome back to the cold front. We are going to make our way back to weather news in the United States, and we are going to start out in California.
And we've mentioned the California drought in previous episodes, but it's actually turning out to be a very interesting event. According to scientists at the University of California, Berkeley, the Golden State is in the midst of the worst drought in 500 years. The drinking water supply in the state is at an all-time low, and because of the 3-year-long dry period, fire danger is extremely high. Most of the state is experiencing extreme drought, which is the second highest of 6 ratings. About 10%, however, is experiencing exceptional drought, which is the highest possible level. Over 15 communities are in danger of running out of water, forcing some to buy it or run pipes from other districts. According to the Department of Water Resources, the state will need to have heavy rain or snow every other day until May in order to achieve average annual precipitation levels. But the drought in California will have consequences outside of the state's borders as well. California produces a large amount of the nation's food. Half of all our fruits and vegetables and a significant amount of dairy and wine come from California. That's not always something we think about when you think about droughts, and we've mentioned this in past episodes, how the farmers and everyone out in California are really struggling because of this drought.
Yeah, and another thing to think about is everybody always thinks about, oh, this is the worst it's been in my lifetime. Worst is, remembering from the meteorological standpoint, it always seems that people have really short memories. If they say it's the worst they've ever experienced, it's really the worst in 5 years or so.
Sure.
But this is 500 years the baddest. So it really is the worst that in anybody's lifetime, or your granddaddy's lifetime, or any of that
For sure.
stuff. Well, clear skies and perfect visibility. That sounds like perfect flying weather. Well, that isn't always the case. Clear air turbulence, especially in the mountainous regions, can wreak havoc on planes.
And this happened to United Airlines Flight 1676 in the early afternoon on February 17th while beginning its descent into Billings, Montana at about 34,000 feet. The Boeing 737 violently lurched to the right and fell rapidly, sending passengers and crew members out of their seats. 2 passengers and 3 flight attendants suffered injuries, and one of the passengers hit her head so hard it cracked the overhead luggage compartment. What happened here happens all the time, just not usually as violent as this case.
That's right, Rachel. This happens in stable air. That is air that prefers to return to its original height if it is disturbed. A fast jet stream like we had was disturbed by the mountains and rose higher to go over them, then wanted to return down. The problem is it now had the downward momentum and can't just stop at the height it wants to be and it overshoots down. At this point, the jet stream decelerates and changes directions back up, overshooting again. And that's what we call this oscillating air and wave. That's a mountain wave. They can form with clouds, but without the moisture, they usually don't and can be undetectable. In this case, the wind speeds in the jet were ridiculous, and there was a strong, stable layer. This made the vertical wind components of this wave strong, and the United Airlines flight flew right into the downward part of the wave, sending the plane temporarily out of control. And this thing, it happens. We talk about airline turbulence, and especially in the pilot world, they have several things where they do about it. Mostly it's just pilot reports turbulence, and then they relay it back to other aircrafts. But if you're the first airplane to experience something, usually you're not expecting it. And for a jet that large to report extreme violent turbulence, that just, it goes to show. I mean, it dropped a couple thousand feet instantly. Yeah. I mean, it sent for the passengers that weren't buckled in straight up. I think that's just a good reason to always keep your seatbelt in a plane.
I totally agree with you there. I've been in a little bit of turbulence, and it was a little freaky, so I can only imagine how scary this one was. Well, this past Monday, much of the Chicagoland area, including us here in Northwest Indiana, received yet another taste of winter.
More snow fell across much of the area, but what was most interesting on Monday was recorded in Chicago. The phenomenon known as thunder snow occurred in the afternoon when the most intense snow was falling. And thunder snow, really, Chicago hasn't heard that since the Groundhog's Day blizzard back in 2011. That's just when you get a very large snow band, intense enough to get an updraft that acts like a thunderstorm in the cold temperature. So that's really a rare scenario, but real cool to hear that sometimes.
Definitely. And I know I was a little bit jealous that I didn't have a chance to hear it, but I definitely know some people who had. And there were some thunder snow reports all the way down near central Illinois around the Champaign area as well. So it wasn't just an isolated event in Chicago, but it was definitely recorded there as well. So definitely very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting indeed. The snow also caused travel hazards across the area as well. Because of the strong winds, the snow was blown around, causing what is called whiteout conditions. Visibilities dropped down to 1/8 of a mile in some places in Chicago. The whiteout conditions nearly tripled travel times around the city, canceled almost 1,000 flights, and caused multiple accidents on the roadways. And you talk about the snow depth falling from the skies, and you know you get 4 or 5 inches, but when you blow it around, the drifts. It's just travel, not fun.
Well, whiteout conditions are not fun. And travel around the Chicagoland area can be really tough, as you and I both interned at WGN at different times. And traveling to that station for that internship is hard enough as it is sometimes.
Yeah, traffic really slows down even with just a little rain.
Exactly.
I mean, so once you deal with the snow and more slippery conditions, visibility, I don't think I ever want to drive on those roads.
So imagine tripling that normal drive. I mean, that's not fun. And obviously a lot of accidents occurred as a result of that as well. So definitely not fun. Well, switching from snow, we actually had some severe weather reported as well. 354 total severe weather reports from February 20th included 23 tornado reports and 305 wind reports. And with those wind reports, some winds were sustained of over 40 miles per hour in the Chicagoland area, and gusts up to 70 miles per hour were recorded near the city of Chicago itself. And that's definitely significant in a lot of ways due to the fact that, that's sustained winds at 40 miles per hour. I know walking around campus Thursday and on Friday, I mean, I'm a small person, so I have a little bit of a smaller, body mass area, and I felt like I was being pushed sometimes. I couldn't keep my footing because the wind was so strong.
Walking to class for me, it wasn't too bad. I had the wind at my back, but then returning back to my apartment, you really had to fight that wind. It was not fun. And then you talk about all the changing weather going on. You had the thunderstorms, then that heavy fog that set up. It really dropped the visibilities down to almost nothing at points. In fact, I even had to drive across campus to my job, and you could not see, if you're familiar with Valpo's campus, you could not see the parking garage from Alumni Hall. I mean, it was that bad, that thick of fog. And then overnight, we saw a dusting of snow. I mean, this is just an insane trend. You get this in the winter if you can get the severe weather and the warming. Then it's going to usually drop back. It takes usually an insane cyclone, and it really had a big low pressure system because it kind of bombed out. And then finally it included the next day. But the East Coast saw severe weather as well. 112 total severe reports, 5 of them being tornadoes. I think there was a couple in Maryland even, which this is February, So we're keeping this extreme weather kind of pattern going on. But unfortunately, that pattern that brought us that brief hint of warm weather, that's usually your teaser spring.
Yeah.
If you remember that really cold pattern we've had a couple weeks ago, Yeah, it's setting up again. We're going to be cold for the next couple weeks. It doesn't look fun, Rachel.
Yeah, it definitely looks like we have some high temperatures getting back to those upper teens again. And I was sitting here thinking, like, oh, this is so great. Like, we're getting warmer again. Then I was looking at some maps and all that, weather stuff, and I'm just like, oh man, like we're getting cold again. I thought we were going to be over, but it's like you said, it's a very kind of rocky pattern, and pretty soon we're going to be getting out of it. We just have to get through the rocky pattern.
The good news is we're going to have, it's almost going to be the exact same cold pattern that dropped us to -20 a couple weeks ago, but the great news about that is the nights are shorter, so we're not going to get enough time to cool that cold. I think we could see some temperatures below 0, and then especially in the single digits, but it won't be as cold as it was in mid-January there.
For sure. And spring break is coming up here on the Valpo campus, so looks like it's going to be a little cold leaving campus, which unfortunately doesn't really feel that much like spring, but maybe some people have plans going somewhere warm like Florida. Might be good for them, but unfortunately I'm going to be staying in an area that's a little bit cold. I'm only going 6 hours south, so it's still going to be a little bit chilly there, but anyone staying in Northwest Indiana, Chicagoland area, they're in for some cold.
I think there might be some hope for the second week of spring break. The first week, it looks a little cold in the Chicagoland area.
For sure. Well, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear from our producer, Dave Caulfield, with a special report on the enhanced Great Lakes ice cover.
And we'll also answer your viewer questions. It's the cold front on VUTV.
We're WVUR and we're on VUTV.
I'm Chris Sosnowski and I'm on VUTV.
Hi, I'm Nicole Batzik and I'm on VUTV.
We're Sweet Wine and we're on VUTV.
My name is Chris Frankel and I'm on VUTV.
Welcome back. VUTV weather producer Dave Caulfield recently took a trip up to the Indiana Dunes to talk about the state of the Great Lakes ice cover this winter and what this means for the weather down the road.
Well, this winter has been very harsh across the Midwest, with record-breaking low temperatures seemingly ever present across the area. One of the effects of a very cold winter, as you can see behind me, is enhanced ice cover across the Great Lakes.
Earlier this month, ice cover over the Great Lakes hit 88% for the first time since 1994. Typically at its peak, the average ice cover is just over 50%. The 2 years with the largest ice coverage since 1973 were 1979, where there was 94.7%, and 1994, 90.7%. Lake Ontario was the body of water to blame for the Great Lakes not breaking the record for total ice area. Because of its depth and the mixing in of water from Niagara Falls, Lake Ontario requires longer periods of cold weather to freeze. Last week on Thursday, Ontario's ice cover was just a bit more than 40%. Other lakes at that time were almost completely covered, Superior at 93.6%, Huron at 95%, and Erie at 95.7%. Lake Michigan was just a bit under those at 81%. So what does above average ice cover on the Great Lakes mean in the big picture? The most noticeable impact for the area is the shutting down of the lake effect snow machine. Without the relatively warmer lake evaporating and interacting with the colder air aloft, lake effect snow is greatly minimized, even with favorable fetch. Diminished lake effect clouds translate to more sunny days. The ice reduces evaporation, but this could be a positive as the Great Lakes experienced record low water levels last year after 2 straight years of below average ice cover. And the ice cover could help delay the spring warm-up. Good news for farmers, as it helps keep certain crops like fruit trees, dormant longer and less susceptible to freezing early in the growing season. The ice could also act as a barrier from winter storms for the spawning beds of whitefish and some other fish species. On the other hand, it's bad news for the shipping industry, whose vessels can't go anywhere when their ports are frozen solid.
Now, currently the total ice area for the Great Lakes is just under 70%, but with below average temperatures set to return for quite some time, the ice cover across the Great Lakes could significantly increase in the coming weeks. For the Cold Front, I'm meteorologist Dave Caulfield.
Thanks, Dave. We are now going to turn to our viewer question. This question comes from our Facebook fan, Wanda Landerum. She asked, based on this harsh winter, are there any thoughts on what kind of summer is ahead for northern Indiana? And Matt, I know I was talking to one of my roommates earlier, and the Climate Prediction Center has actually released their outlook for March, and that looks to be below average. So if you kind of think of it in those terms, I'm wondering if it's going to be a little bit below average, at least for the beginning of summer.
Yeah, and you know, that doesn't surprise me at all. I have not seen the climate averages yet, but with the snow cover we have that's so thick, it's really hard for the sun when it comes out to really help warm up the temperatures. So below average, especially with the persistent cold pattern we're in, I can definitely see it being very, very cold. And you know, the summertime, it's really hard to look that far. However, there are some reports going out, if you look at a climatological statistical averages here, when you have a really below average winter, most of the summers are also below average as well. So that's a common misconception where a cold winter equals a warm summer. There really isn't a lot of connection besides the fact that the pattern has been colder. It takes longer for the atmosphere to recover. So that just means that there's a greater chance of, on average, colder summer. That doesn't mean we're not going to get 100-degree days. That doesn't mean we're not going to get warm outbreaks. There should be fewer of them, and there should be less intense. And this is, of course, only looking at statistical averages.
For sure. And it's like you said, you know, maybe towards the middle, the end of summer, we might be seeing a little bit more closer to normal. But definitely in the beginning, I think it's definitely going to be very cold.
Yeah, that's going to do it for this edition of The Cold Front. I'm Matthew Schaefer.
And to see all our episodes of The Cold Front as well as the latest information on Valpo weather, like us on Facebook, which is VUTV Weather, or visit our YouTube page, Valpo VUTV. Well, the winds have shifted to the northwest because the cold front has moved through. Have a great day, everyone.